sent back from Djibouti. So it's no surprise that many of them end up in Kenya. And it was Kenya that I went to in September last year. Lydia Namara arranged contacts for me, and I went to 3 places. I'll just show you where. The camp at Kakuma, which is 120 kilometers from the Sudanese border. 3 camps at Dadaab, which are 70 kilometers from the Somali border, and 2 slum estates in Nairobi. Ora got the funding, and I went there for 2 weeks in September. I interviewed 58 refugees in depth for about an hour. Some were longer, some were a little bit shorter. These were not selected in terms of the severity of the abuse they'd had in Ethiopia. They were selected in terms of where they'd come from, how long they'd been in Kenya, and what age they were. The only thing I insisted on was that at least half of the interviewees were women, and 31 were women and 27 were men. As you see, 32 of them had had friends or relatives killed by the regime. And in 14, this was a very close relative. By a first-degree relative, I mean mother, daughter, father, son, sister, brother, wife, or husband. And 15 had had first-degree relatives disappeared by the regime. Tahir is a typical example of the people I interviewed. He's chair of one of the Oromo communities at one of the camps in Dadaab, Ifo camp. He's a 45-year-old man. He was detained for 2 years and 8 months in 1994, his first detention. And when he was there, he was given a list of names and told to pick out those who supported the OLF that he knew from this list of names. He was taken out at night, and they put a pistol up his nose and said, "This is your last chance. You have to tell us who on this list belongs to the OLF." He heard pistol shots being fired elsewhere and was told that was other prisoners being shot. And in fact, he gave me the names of 3 people from the cell that he was being held in who went out like this and did not come back to the cell. They were killed. And in 2006, she was detained again for 6 months. She was held in a different military camp, but taken by a different route to the same pit with these dead bodies in, and had the same treatment. She was beaten so severely during this detention that she said she couldn't even stand to go to the toilet. She just had to lie down and do it where she was. There were 2 other women held in the cell with her, and one was beaten so severely with the rifle butts that she started to bleed from her nose and ears, which is a sign of a fractured skull, and then she died. They were fed on leftover scraps that the guards had discarded. And she was released after she put a fingerprint to a document to promise to reveal the names and the villages of all of her husband's friends, otherwise she and her children would be killed. She had to do this within 15 days. And so, as soon as she was released, she ran to Kenya. 1% of men and 35% of women had been tortured in Ethiopia. This is an incredibly high percentage amongst refugee populations. Of the interviewees, 47%, that's men and women, had been tortured. If you only looked at the ones that had been detained, then it was 66%. If you only looked at the men who'd been detained, then 20 out of 25, that's 80%, had been tortured. This is Abiba. She's 27. I interviewed her in Kakuma. In 2004, her husband was detained and disappeared. 8 soldiers came to her house, to her compound, asking to see his documents. They searched the place, and of course they didn't find any OLF documents. And then they took her and her 1-year-old twins out to the bush, and between 8 o'clock that night and 12 o'clock that night, the 8 soldiers raped her. I said, well, what did you do then? And she said, after you've been raped by 8 soldiers for 4 hours, you can't do anything, you can't go anywhere. And she was found the next day by her neighbours at 9 o'clock in the morning. 3 days later, soldiers came to her compound. Normally they will restrict you to your village, but they said, you don't even leave this compound. You stay in this compound or you'll be in trouble. They took everything they could find from her hut, and after they'd gone, she gathered some money that she had hidden, and then got a truck to Nairobi, begged for some money at a mosque, and with that money paid an agent to take her over the border into Kenya. And then she got a cattle truck to Nairobi. Pretty similar to what you'd see in Kakuma camp. And 3 families shared this compound. This is one of the group meetings that I had. Remember, I'd spoke about group meetings before. This is a kiosk, an Oromo shop that, like all the other Oromo businesses, has been forced to close. Unlike in Kakuma, most of the men here work, but very few, only 15 or 20, work for NGOs for this incentive. Most do menial work for Somali businesses, restaurants, hotels, this sort of thing, just for $15 or $20 a month. This is one of the 2 schools in Dagahale, one of the 3 camps, and only between 1/4 and 1/2 of the Oromo children go to primary school, and only 3 of those of the correct age go to secondary school. And this is because they're frightened of the hostility from the other Somali refugees. This hostility involves killings. I heard of several killings of people who tried to set up businesses. They'd even changed their names to Arabic names to fit in with the local Somali people, but they were killed. 3 of them were killed. I heard of young men being put into protective custody because they were subject to attack from other refugees because they'd dared to lend a telephone to a young Somali girl. And what this lady said is typical of some of the abuse. I'll read it in case you can't read it from the back. The Somalis say we are pagans, even at the water tap. After us, they insist on washing the tap, saying pagans have used it. They say we are animals. They don't consider us as human beings. If you buy something, they tell you to put the money down on the table. They do not take it from your hand. Then they throw the change at you. We're unable to dress culturally. We can't express our culture. If we celebrate, they are more hostile. They complained of being called Gal or Galki, which is similar to the Gala term. For those of you who don't know, Gala is a term used by non-Oromo Ethiopians for Oromo, and it's similar to the use of the word nigger in America, and it's got that same sort of connotation. Even if we're married to a Muslim, our neighbours say we are married to a Gal. They say, there are a lot of men here, why do you marry a Gal? They call me a prostitute. In the queue for rations, they say we smell, and tell us not to stand next to them. The Somali